people tonight, so that's really great. Again, this is the Wild Ones meeting. Next slide, because I can't do these. Sorry. Hopefully we can do it. There we go. So Big River Big Woods is the local chapter for the national chapter of Wild Ones. Attendance at our events is always free. You do not have to be a member. My name is Cindy May. I'm membership director, so you may hear from me. If you go to our chapter website at Big River Big Woods, you can get more information, and you can also sign up to subscribe to emails. We would of course love you to join join our chapter, and it helps support our projects and our speakers. It's $40 for an annual membership and $25 if you're a student. You do get the Wild Ones Journal if you are a subscribed member. Okay, next one. I just included some additional resources here, our website, the national website, some good Facebook pages, because it's always nice to have other resources to get more information. We have a great Instagram page. Crystal Colby takes care of that. So if you're an Instagrammer, be sure to look at that. Lots of good information there. Next one. We have a number of service projects that we're working on. I just want to remind people that Sunday, May 19th, the Island Lake School Garden Project is looking for volunteers to help do garden cleanup. That's on Victoria Avenue. It's also on our website. You do not need to sign up, just show up, and Karen Ekman or Leanne Finney will be there and just help out with that. Como Park Woodlands Garden is also looking for some volunteers, and we have both a Wild Ones walk and a garden tour there this summer. So
we're only going to have a tour.
Well, we might do the walk still.
Sorry. There may not be both walk and tour. But we'll have one of them.
Yes.
And if there's any projects you're interested in starting, let us know, because we have resources that we can help out if you have a school or a project in the neighborhood you're interested in. Next slide. Next month's meeting, Dale Gentry from the Conservation Director for Audubon Upper Mississippi River is going to talk about gardening is for the birds, science and suggestions on how to have a bird-friendly garden. So be sure you come tonight. It's going to be fun. Next slide. And then this month, on the 30th, our first Wild Walk. Thank you, Liz and Catherine, for setting these up. It's going to be at Tony Schmidt Regional Park, 1 o'clock on Sunday, March 30th. For those of you who aren't familiar with Wild Walks, it's kind of a way just for nature lovers to get together and kind of walk around an area that has a lot of vegetation and plants and kind of talk and explore. So very informal. Just meet at the Lake Johanna Beach parking lot. Next slide. And all of the whole WOW schedule is also on our website, but this is the schedule for the year. So they've really worked to put some great places together for us. Next, our May meeting is going to be at one of our members' gardens, and we'll have that information at the next meeting. We're going to learn how to do bare rooting on plants, and also talk about jumping worms, and more information about jumping worms. And we'll get that more information specifically next month on that. Next, summer garden tours. We have got some fantastic summer garden tours. Really, Erica's done a fabulous job getting things together. So some really fun stuff. Sunday, June 22nd is going to be Como Park Woodlands Garden. July 15th, we're going to look at the Keller Park Golf Course Restoration Tour. That one is going to be, we may have sign up online for that, because we have to get golf carts, get to drive around in golf carts. So we have to know how many people are coming. So, but that's going to be a really fun tour. And then afterwards, you can meet at the little restaurant there if people want to get together for a social event afterwards. And then August is going to be in Leanne Finney's garden. We don't have a date finalized yet. So it's going to be a fun summer. Next. Oh, now Erica is going to talk about our pet fabric.
So it's that time of year again, and we're going to have a plant sale. There's a few different, it'll be similar to last year's, because it's going to be at the same place. John and Becky have so kindly offered to have the sale at their place again. And the address is shown up here. It'll be on our website too. When you plug it into your phone or your navigation system, be sure you put the zip code because you can end up in the wrong place. John can tell you more about that, but sometimes that happens. And we're having it a different weekend. It's after it's after Memorial Day, I believe, but it's before the revival. So I'm hoping people can come. We're doing it a week earlier so that you can get things in the ground sooner. So the 31st, 9 a.m. to 3, and then on Sunday, June 1st, noon to 3. And we're doing things a little differently this year. We're not having ordering online. So instead, we're gonna have a downloadable form that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, that's on our website. And then Joe has also listed all the plants that we're gonna be selling. You can click on those that we have information on, and you can get a lot more information on each plant on our website. So the downloadable form will have a little bit of information about planting conditions and sun and the pricing and that kind of thing. And we hope we have enough plants available for everybody. It's gonna be first come, first serve. But on Sunday, we'll probably have slightly lower pricing so we can move things out. So each day there'll be a reason to come. The scarce plants will be on Saturday, and then Sunday there'll be lower pricing. And we're pricing everything to move too. So you'll notice that our prices are lower than what you'll find commercially. So next slide. We're once again going with Glacial Ridge for the flowers, ferns, sedges, and grasses. We have several pollinator flats again, the bee-friendly, the bee pollinator mix, the butterfly pack, and the hummingbird pack. So that's 6 different species, 3 plants each in those flats. And that'll be a solid price. We aren't gonna break those flats up. So it's actually about half price compared to what it would cost in a garden store. And then we also are trying something new. We're going, instead of with Outback, we're going with a Wisconsin group, Chief River Nursery. And we've used them for some projects and gotten very good results with their bare root plants. So we get the plants bare root, and then we're planting them a couple weeks before you see them. So they'll be in pots and you won't have to plant them right away.
I've ordered from that company too. They have good plants.
Oh, good,
Yeah, I've had
good.
success with that.
Yeah, they're like 2 to 3 year old plants, so they're smaller than what you might expect, but they grow really fast. So especially the shrubs, we've had very good luck. Steve and I helped plant some at one of our sites, and some of I think it's 2 years later, and the shrubs are this big, and they started out like this, so it's pretty good. And we're trying to focus on those shrubs and trees that have flowers for the pollinators and berries for the birds and other wildlife, so you'll notice that. And then lastly, I think that this is lastly, we also will have Preston again. And with Northern University. So he's gonna have a tent at the entry like we did last year. But this year, he's going to have some online ordering, and you can do pickup at the sale, or you can buy plants at the sale. So
if you want a guarantee, Preston's your guy, right?
yeah. And Preston will probably talk about some of those plants today.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
So,
Okay, back to me. Next slide. Tonight's question in a box. So if you have comments, ideas for talks, questions, be sure to pull them out and put it in the box. And then we have 2 drawings tonight. Yeah, Joe's modeling that there. Nice, that's Joe. And then we have 2 drawings tonight. One is for a t-shirt from Preston's company, and the other is for a book on foraging, which is really nice. In fact, one of the ones he kind of had recommended.
Oh, yeah, I brought that book too.
Yeah. So we'll have 2 drawings for tonight. Next. Oh, now we're up to here. So tonight we're fortunate to have Preston here tonight to talk to us. And I just have a little bio stuff I'll give on him. He was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we are fortunate that his wife dragged him back to Minnesota here. She had a family, so he's now located here. He moved here in 2012, right? His background, though, is as a visual artist, musician, and educator, and he's had multiple exhibits, including the Minneapolis Institute of Art and the Walker Art Center. He's also a certified master naturalist, yay, through the University of Minnesota, and he's involved in a lot of community volunteer projects with that. His interest in immersive outdoor spaces led him to starting Northern Holler Nursery and Gardens. And it's a native plant nursery and ecology-based landscaping operation that runs out of your home, right? Yeah. And just this last month, he was featured in Wild Ones under the member garden section.
Yep.
So there's a nice article about him and his gardens in there, and some nice pictures of his home. And tonight he's going to talk about, well, eating your yard, so foraging in your backyard. I think I got plants that you could all find in your backyard, right?
Oh, yeah,
They do
yeah.
okay.
Definitely garlic mustard.
Yeah.
Right.
Fiddlehead. Yeah. Great. So welcome, Preston.
Okay, so I'm gonna take it away. So I have to do a couple little techie things over here. Good thing we did this before. Okay, and then in theory, this should work properly. The only thing is, I don't think I'll be able to keep an eye on the Zoom. So if anybody has any questions or if there's like an issue with the Zoom, I won't be able to see that.
All right. I can
So
see
it looks good out
great.
there. Great. We figured it out. Woo! And then, yeah, so I'm Preston Drum. That was a great introduction. So I don't have a lot to say, but I'll start with a few slides. Since I have a visual art background, it kind of makes sense for me to start that way. So who is Preston Drum? First and foremost, I'm a gardener. So you can see me here as I think I was maybe about 4 years old, digging in my mom's yard. I don't have a picture of my mom's yard, but her yard was just completely full of plants. There was no lawn. And she said, if you want to play basketball, you got to go down the street to the park or something. And I say the same thing to my kids now. Like, if you want to go play soccer or football, there's a gigantic school field like a block away. So just walk over there. So I've been doing this for a while with the gardening thing. It's been humming along in the background of my life. But for many years, I was primarily focused on making visual art. And so the reason why I put these two slides in here is this is a project that I did with a group of immigrant artists called Carry On Homes. And you may have seen this if you ventured downtown by the Viking Stadium. It was up there in 2018, 19. And I liked this piece because it was about creating a home for people to kind of come and convene. So you can see we're sitting here on a stage. So we had a lot of immigrant performers come and perform there. And then we had dinners and like potlucks. And then in the middle, there was a garden there with a lot of some native plants. This was kind of before my evangelist native plant period. But all of them were edible in some case, or it could be used in medicine or for just like a kinesthetic kind of touching thing. And yeah, it was a really cool thing. I hope to maybe push my art in that direction someday, where I'm kind of fusing the world of plants with my visual art background. So we'll see how that goes. And then this piece right here, I'm not going to talk about art for a long time. This is just the one slide. I just got to get it out there. This is a piece that I did at the Walker Art Center. And the reason why I find this is important because this was a piece that I made with an artist from Syria, and he couldn't come to the United States because he was on basically from a country that was listed as like no-go by Trump's first administration. So I was a surrogate, and basically he gave me instructions on how to create this piece. And what this piece is a border crossing. And these are the items that people that cross the border leave in the middle in this kind of no person zone. And on the floor, there was all this bubble wrap. So when you walked across it, the way that we constructed this, you had to walk across it to go through the museum. Your feet would make popping sounds. So this piece, like, it just kind of came to my mind recently, even though it's from 2018 or 17, and I was just thinking about it, and thought I would share these two with you. So I'm also a teacher. I've taught at MCAD, St. Cloud State University, University of Wisconsin, Stout, and Menominee, among many workshops and whatnot. And this is my mentee here. She's in graduate school at MCAD, which is Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and she's graduating this year. So if you want to see more art, you should go see her thesis show. It's incredible. And she does art that is participatory. So they're like games and stuff, and they're kind of connected to folk art. So it's just, I love her art so much. So I just want to kind of put that out there, like put it in your brain. Maybe you can get out there to see it. And then lastly, I'm a father. I have, what's that? Oh, sorry. This is Elizabeth Blackwell. Yeah, my apologies. Yeah, lastly, I'm a father. So those are my kids being cute. And then we kind of talked about this already, but the way that I kind of got enveloped in this world that is Wild Ones was participating in the Wild Ones sale. And this is our booth at John's house last year. And yeah, so basically the reason why I started this company, well, wait, I'll get to that in a second, but I just wanted to say that, like, though I do sell stuff that's not native, because I feel it's important to have edibles accessible to people, some of those are not native, but this particular presentation is all about native edible plants. But before we kick it off and go full bore into it, I've got 3 disclaimers here. So number 1 is, before you eat any plant, whether it's wild or cultivated, you must be 100% positive of the identification of that plant. And the reason why is, well, there's a lot of plants that have lookalikes. So this is a plant that's native to Minnesota, and I can take you to a couple of prairies this summer where it grows. So this is Death Camas, and then this is Allium cernum, otherwise known as nodding onion. So these two look virtually the same when they're dug out of the ground, when they're ready for harvest, right? But if you eat this one, you get very sick and possibly die. If you eat this one, you have a good time and it tastes delicious, and you can eat it and eat it and eat it. So just, you have to be super positive that you're getting there. So, and I like to think also, if you're going to try to eat a new plant, just eat a small amount at first, because you kind of don't really know how your body's going to react to it. So it may taste delicious. You may go to someone's house and they're cooking up some good stuff, and you just go in, all in, and then you get a tummy ache later, So I equate it to like what we do with children. When they're toddlers or babies, we give them a little bit of peanut, a little bit of egg, a little bit of milk, just to make sure that they don't have a reaction. And I would highly advise that you do that too. So disclaimer 2, I want to just put it out there that I'm not a professional forager. I'm just an aspiring novice in this particular field. My expertise is more in kind of like arranging plants into communities. And I kind of come at it more from the perspective of like a horticulturist or a landscaper, and it's about creating a space for me. So I'll introduce you to some people that know a lot more about the plants and what you can eat and what you shouldn't eat and how to prepare it later in the presentation, so you can kind of follow up online later. And then the other thing, this kind of goes back to that first slide that we talked about with identification. This is a powerful tool, right? But it'll only get you like maybe 80% there. And sometimes not even that, because you take a picture of, say you took a picture of white snake root. This is the plant that killed Abraham Lincoln's mother, it might show that plant being anise hyssop, which is completely edible, you know? So because they have very similar leaf shapes and, you know, and veins and growth habit, they both have squared stems, you know? So again, this is only going to get you a little bit far, you know, it's only going to get you like halfway there. It's best to make sure you get some field guides. And this is one that I recommend. This is Sam Thayer's Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants of Eastern and Central North America. It's a very long title, but you can see in this slide here, there's an excerpt from the book and what it looks like. So make sure you get a field guide if you're interested in eating plants. And I brought a few here for you to take a look at. So books are best. And then lastly, if you have access to a human being who has a wealth of knowledge, you should access that. You should go on these walks, these wild one walks, and hopefully someone's there that's eaten a plant before and they can show you that plant and then you can try it. Oh, the one last thing I wanted to mention about if you do try to take pictures like with iNaturalist or Seek, don't just take a picture of just the top of the plant, you know, or just the flower. You want to make sure you get a picture of the stem, the leaves on top and bottom, and then the flowers or fruit or seeds, whatever's present in that stage of growth, and that will help the AI like figure it out a lot better. Disclaimer 3, I kind of already talked about this, but I'll just reiterate. I'm a landscaper and a horticulturalist. I'm a curator of plants. And the reason why I'm doing this talk is because I think it's important to get people engaged with nature, to get them engaged with their landscapes. And one way to do that is by getting them to interact with food, because food is culture, right? And you all know, because you're here at this Wild Ones talk, that like the culture needs to change, right? We can't have, I mean, this is amazing to play baseball on out there, you know, like turf is great for that, but it's not great for the environment, right? It's not great for the other living things around us. So that's why I kind of brought up this notion that Joey Santor talks about, which is the living world. So he has this thing, he kind of goes on it in his shows almost every other episode where he says, I hate the word nature. Nature is a terrible word. And well, only he's got a really thick Chicago accent. And I'm not going to try and impersonate or, you know, do an imitation right now. But he calls it the living world. And that's something that kind of like keeps like pinging around in my head that like, oh, that's not nature. Nature's not separate from us. It's the living world and we're a part of it. So again, that's why you're all here doing the good work, the hard work of getting nature and bringing it into our community and connecting people to it. So, yeah.
What was that dog up in the corner? I didn't understand your cartoon.
Oh, well, that is just like, it's like a dog who's thinking about like a dog who's thinking about a dog who's thinking about a dog, you know, like just in terms of like proliferating a message, you know, sending it off into the world and like echoes. You've heard of the butterfly effect, right?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it, when it said January 10th, I thought it was like he was thinking of himself the day before.
No, I used to keep a journal with all these little drawings, and sometimes I just call back to them, and they remind me of, you know, certain things I did around that time or whatnot. It's kind of like a little journal. But that yeah. So that one just like kind of called to me in that moment and speaking about this idea of like thinking about something, but also like actualizing it, right? Because I think about plants all day long, but I'm not going to affect any positive change in the world unless I go out and plant them. And then I can only affect so much positive change by doing that I have to start a nursery, you know, to sell plants to other people so that they can go out and plant them, you know. Like we talked about that butterfly effect, how like there's ripples throughout the culture, right? The reason why I got into art and music was about sharing culture with other people and connecting with other people. And that seemed like it would make that made the most sense to me at that time in my life. And now I feel like there's such like kind of like a tidal shift against the living world. We're not going to use the word nature tonight. We're going to try and use the living world. That I feel right now my efforts are best used in like, again, getting those ripples out into the world. So this is also something that I've been kind of thinking about too, which is basically like deep time indigenous culture. So not just indigenous culture that existed here before 1665 or whatever, but like there have been people that have been living in North America for, 27,000 years. And while they didn't grow these specific plants here, there was a system of agriculture. It didn't look like European agriculture, but there was a system of manipulating the land to grow food for many, many people. So how did these cultures do it? Well, they burned it, right? They kept the prairies and the savannas alive by burning. In the case of the wild rice, when they hit the stalks of the wild rice, they collect it into the canoe, but then some of it falls out too. So they're planting seeds to come back. If you dig up a tuber, you plant some of it back, right? And I've been thinking a lot about like Three Sisters as like, it's something that gets kind of tossed around in contemporary culture as like a model for a way of growing, but it's much more complex and deep than that, because this is a system that was kind of honed over many, many years. And I think the takeaway is to think about like indigenous food systems as being like super complex. It wasn't just like, we're going to go out here and hoe up this field and then like plant, some stuff. Like there was a mix of altering the environment, but then also letting some of the environment just be as is, right? And then I also think it's very important to think about how culture is tied to food and food is tied to land. So when you take someone's land away, you take their food away and you take their culture away. So I thought this was a pretty striking image of some Apaches right as they arrived at the boarding school, and then 4 months later, and how much they had transformed, right? So yeah. And then here's a slide that has basically, it's kind of hard to find photos of like normal people, like quote normal people, because from this time period. But I was thinking about like, so like what would my grandfather's like front yard look like in 1920? Like this like pre-World War. I know what his house looked like after he came back from the war, because he got a good job and he bought a house in the suburb, and he had, grass in the front yard, and then grandma had a crepe myrtle and and daylily garden in the back, right? And then my grandfather had a little plot where he grew corn and melons and stuff like that further back there. And I was always like kind of intrigued with that space back there behind the shed where he grew the corn and the melons, and like, what is in this like up front, And so I kind of feel like before the war, there was more of like kind of like a subsistence thing going on around people's houses, and they were growing food, but then they also had flowers, and also places to play. So it was this kind of like this like multifunctional space. And you all know that like this is kind of what happened after World War II, as soldiers came home and the population started expanding, and we basically started using our houses and our yards as a demonstration of culture and wealth. So this ties back to the Native American thing, because their landscapes were a demonstration of their culture, right? This is a demonstration of culture, and so is this, right? So where are we at now, right? What should our gardens look like now? What are our cultural values? And then do those gardens fulfill the promise of those values, right? And then I kind of talked about this already, but like, how do you heal the world around you with these spaces? How can we work in partnership with nature or the living world to feed ourselves and the living world too, right? So this is a book that has come up too recently. You may know about Robin Wall Kimmer. Yeah, she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass and Gathering Moss. But I was really affected by this book. I haven't finished it yet, so don't tell me how it ends. But the first couple of chapters literally had me in tears, in the way that she was able to connect with me emotionally. And I thought that this quote was a good thing to think about. So, and this is just a little bit of background, like, since my practice as a horticulturalist is connected to ecology, that's kind of how I'm thinking about planting plants, as creating a system that works together, right? And has loops and ups and downs. So she talks about the sun. If the sun is the source of flow in the economy of nature, what is the sun of a human gift economy? The source that constantly replenishes the flow of gifts. Maybe it's love, right? So, what is love? Maybe love is planting serviceberry in your yard and sharing with the birds, sharing with the robins, and then you eating them and you collecting them and giving them to your neighbor, and then they make a pie and sell it at the church bake sale or whatever, you know? Like, it's that it feels so much better to give and receive a gift than it does to buy something. So just going back to this notion of like ecology, the living world, systems, the way that we're gonna kind of analyze these plants that we can choose for our landscape that we can eat is through plant community archetypes. This is another book. This might be kind of boring for someone who is not a landscaper, because it's pretty technical, but this is an idea that Thomas Rayner and Claudia West kind of put into this book. I don't think they like invented the idea. They just were observing the living world and systems, and then kind of co-opted that and turned that into a way of landscaping. And this is all centered on the idea of plant community archetypes. So what's an archetype? Anybody can yell that out.
It's like a broad idea with the central figures in culture.
Right. So like in narrative, we have archetypes like protagonist, antagonist, but it can go a little bit even deeper. You have the buffoon. You know, I think of Kevin from The Office as like, he's the buffoon, the lovable buffoon. Like, that's an archetype, right? So it's good for humans to like process things through stories. And so that's a good way to kind of break down the complexity of that living world that we've been talking about. So we're going to center on 3 different archetypes for this presentation. Number 1 is the grassland. So grasslands are characterized as having like few to no trees. They're dominated by, well, grasses, and also herbaceous perennials like forbs and flowers. On average, this is like super generic, on average, they're drier. That's not always the case because you do have seeps, you do have fens, you do have, a bog to a certain extent, wet meadows. You have ditches, right? Those could be grasslands, but they're still very wet. But the main thing is that like there's this idea in ecology of a disturbance regime, and basically that just means that something happens to the place that disrupts what's going on in that moment, and it changes things, and then something else comes in. Those cycles. So in grasslands, it's historically been fire, whether it was set by Native Americans or by some guy, like in a cool Crocodile Dundee hat, like with a kerchief and like those yellow jumpsuits. You'll see them. Now it's fire season in Minnesota. Everybody wants to burn right now, right? So yeah, disturbance. Another way to disturb your grassland is to cut it with a lawnmower, and that's what's going on here. This is a perpetual disturbance regime, right? And in its choices, it chooses turf as the dominant structure. Okay, our second archetype is going to be edgeland. There's a bunch of different names for this. You could call it a woodland. You could call it a savanna. You could call it like there's different classifications of woodlands, like based on the amount of tree cover that exists there. But we're just going to go with edgeland because it kind of like encompasses all of this. And again, it's just a story. We're just telling ourselves a story. So just buy into it. Use suspension of disbelief and go with me. This is just the edgeland. And edgeland sounds cool. It sounds like a place from like Lord of the Rings or something like that. Like we gathered at the edgeland, So the edgeland has super high diversity of different plants because we've got plants that can tolerate shade and can tolerate sun there, right? Trees often act as the cultural stewards of these spaces. So whatever tree starts growing there is going to kind of determine what else happens because the trees are the big guys in this space, right? Or the big ladies too. The big people. So we anthropomorphize plants here. Now, also shrubs can dominate too there, and maybe they will keep the trees at bay and just shrubs kind of exist. But overall, there's a mixed topography and hydrology and soil types. So you could have, sandy edgeland. You could have clayey edgeland. You could have all different types of soil. And then you could have hills and valleys, and then it could also be flat, For the most part, the edgeland is the space between a grassland and a woodland, right? Or a forest, closed canopy forest, or an open canopy forest. So this is our third archetype. This is the woodland. And the woodland is all about trees, right? It's dominated by the trees. So you're going to have much different stuff growing on the ground if you have a canopy full of maples, right? Sugar maples are very, very dense in their growth, and they overlap, and they're super shade tolerant, and they make babies everywhere, and the babies live for 100 years just waiting for a big tree to fall down so they can grow up, right? But then there's all this other like herbaceous stuff that exists down there. And like I was saying before, like edgeland, shrubland, woodland, there can be variations in the canopy too, right? There's two general rules to woodland. If it's upland, if it's up on the top of the hill, it's going to be drier. If it's lower down in the valley, it's going to be a little bit wetter because of gravity, right? Gravity moves the water and hydrology around, right? And then another like kind of defining feature as to why we put grasslands over here, edgeland in the middle, and then woodland way over here is there's low disturbance here. there's little to none, especially if you're on the north side of a hill in kind of a wet area. Fire's not gonna get over there. It doesn't really often cross over into that space and burn those trees up. So a lot of times when you have 200, 300-year-old trees, they're going to be growing on the north side of the slope, right? Because they're somewhat protected there. And then the bad side about little to no disturbance regime is that this is a place for buckthorn and garlic mustard to infiltrate. So you got to watch that. It's going to be a big troublemaker there. There's a bunch of different diversity in the living world, and there's lots of variations in spectrums. And we kind of already talked about that, about bogs, fens, riparian areas, marshes, lakes, potholes, glades, dunes, bottomland forests, swamps. So you could create all these different spaces at your house. It's just going to take a heck of a lot of effort to get there, right? You can make a bog in your backyard. You just dig a hole, throw a bunch of peat in it, and make it really wet all the time. And you can grow bog plants there. The same way you can have aquatic plants by digging a hole in your yard, putting down a liner, filling it up with water, But the better thing to do is to look at your landscape and analyze these different considerations here. So we have light, soil type, moisture, what exists there already in terms of flora, proximity to the house, and your daily routines. Because drawing this all back to where we're coming from and where we're going is we're trying to figure out which archetype our property, our land, our site fits into. So if you got shade, if you got a lot of shade, you're probably close to a woodland or a forest. If you got part sun, so maybe you have a tree on one side of your house and nothing on the other, you're probably an edgeland. And then if you have full sun, no trees, nothing at all, prime territory for a grassland, right? And then there's also different soil types that you'd have to consider. Your moisture, of course, moisture is going to change dramatically depending on where on the site you're thinking about. Right at the downspout from where your rain collects is going to be really much wetter than over by the road where it's getting blasted by sun and heat and baked all day, So you have to kind of think about that stuff. And then I think more importantly for picking edible plants and kind of designing an edible landscape is to think about where you can put the plants in terms of the proximity of the house. So when I'm designing landscapes for a client, if they're like, I want an herb garden, I'm going to put the herb garden right by the kitchen. Because for anybody who has ever cooked anything, you always forget the herbs that you need when you need them. And you're like, oh, shoot, I have to turn the pan down and run outside and get some basil really quick or whatever, And then, maybe you're like thinking about like a hedge, like I want to obscure a point of view. I want to grow some hedges. Hedges are also a great place for birds to live. So maybe you pick something that has that fruits, like a serviceberry or chokeberry or chokecherry, And then if you're going to get really into the edibles, you're probably going to start experimenting with eating some roots. So you don't want to be digging up roots right next to your front door, right? Because then that's just going to leave a blank spot in your landscape, which is, we don't want it to look like the homogeneous, like suburban kind of thing that we were talking about before, but we also don't want it to look bad because we dug up a root to eat it, So you have to think about that, like, oh, maybe I'm gonna have like a bed, like a kind of like a raised bed where I include some of these plants that I want to use the roots for, or maybe you put them in a more natural kind of landscape, so that when you do disturb it there, it doesn't look very obvious, right? Are you going to do it in the front yard or the backyard? And then another thing to think about too is like your daily routines. Do you work from home? Do you only see your garden at 5 o'clock when you get home from work? Are you busy? Do you need a low maintenance garden? So these are things to consider as you're like designing this garden. And then this is a little image I drew up real quick to kind of just illustrate how we can occupy all the different kind of stratospheres of growth possibilities, right? So there's a term that gets thrown around a lot that's called food forest. Have you heard that? Yeah. So this, I'll talk about permaculture in a little bit, but the basic idea is that, again, thinking about the earth and the atmosphere is like different layers of a stratosphere. Your garden can be those different layers. So we have the root zone. I'm going to start from the bottom and go up. So we have the root zone, and then we have the ground cover. So these are plants that would sit like on top, maybe stoloniferous growth, maybe they have rhizomes and whatnot. And then number 4 would be the herbaceous perennials. So these are kind of like the ferns or stuff that what I would say would grow from like 24 inches to like maybe 5 feet tall. And then we have shrubs, and then we have vines, which can grow on trees. They can grow on shrubs. They can grow on fences. And then the top one is the canopy layer. And one thing, this is a bit of an aside, but like if you have a tree, like I really want to grow Doug Tallamy has this thing about oak trees. Like if you don't have room for an oak tree in your yard, he's like, just pullard it. So, which is basically like you let it grow up about 3 to 5 feet and then you chop it off. And then what it does is it sends up a bunch of different stems. So this is like a little basically like a caterpillar factory. And then this is an old practice where you can use those young stems and you can make baskets out of it. You make all sorts of different crafts and stuff. And coppicing is when you cut the tree off or the shrub off at the ground. So pollarding is up top and coppicing is down below. But you can use these strategies to control the growth of trees, right? So that they don't get out of control. So just a quick note about permaculture. So this was developed by this guy named Bill Mollison, and he lived in Australia. So when you're thinking about permaculture through the lens of North American plants, you kind of have to have some elasticity. You have to kind of stretch your mind because like in Australia, they can literally grow like any plant all year long, depending on where you are. Maybe if you're in the Northwest part, you can only, grow stuff when it's raining there, like for 3 months of the year. But like if you live in like Tasmania, like the southern eastern part, you can pretty much grow like anything all the time. We can't do that in Minnesota. So when you're kind of thinking about permaculture, like ideas and techniques, you have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt or change things to kind of fit our systems of the living world. So I think the best thing to do is to basically like do a lot of experimenting and a lot of observing and seeing what works and what doesn't work, Are you familiar with the idea of a guild? Yeah, so this is a thing in permaculture, basically like say you have a fruit tree, like a cherry tree or peach tree, maybe a tiny little peach tree that could grow in Minnesota. Apple tree is like you plant your tree and then you plant things with the tree that assist it. So one guild I'm familiar with is like basically you plant your apple tree and then you plant onions around the stem. And that's to prevent rodents and voles and rabbits and whatnot from going and like chewing on the stems. And then maybe you also plant rhubarb so that it shades the soil and keeps it a little bit wetter there, So none of those plants are native to Minnesota, with the exception of maybe the apple tree, right? If you got some really good old genetics from an old prairie, but still you might not want to eat those apples. I don't know. It's not going to be as good as a Honeycrisp, right? So again, we have to use some elasticity when thinking about permaculture and applying it to native plants because it's not a one-to-one relationship, right? Okay, so for this next kind of portion of the presentation, I'm going to talk about examples of plants and what you can do with them, So we're going to go through each of our archetypes and we're going to design a landscape together. So again, thinking about that, this slide here, we're going to think about all the different stratospheres of possibilities in this living world that we're creating. So up top, we have the canopy layer. So good trees that I'd recommend that you can eat, maple, it could be sugar maple, silver maple, black maple, basswood, preferably not London linden, or the European linden tree, but the American linden tree, hemlock, and of course oaks. For the herbaceous layer, so these are going to be plants in the woodland that are either probably shrubs or taller growing herbaceous stuff. So cutleaf coneflower, ostrich fern, which you had in your slides earlier, right? That's what fiddleheads are, right? Ostrich ferns. Spikenard, columbine, hawthorn, wood nettle, viburnum. Some viburnum species can grow in a little bit more shade, but they generally like more of an edgeland habitat. And then on our ground layer, so this is going to start happening really soon, but the ramps are going to start coming up in the bottomland forest, right? Solomon seal is going to start poking up in your garden. Virginia waterleaf, wood sorrel, spring beauty, sweet cecily, big leaf aster, woodland phlox. Okay, so this is just a list of plants, right? Well, I'll show you what you can do with them later. But let's kind of hone in a little bit and pick a plant from each category to kind of think about how we can actually use this plant. So this is what my house has looked like for the past like 2 or 3 weeks, right? We're making maple syrup there. In our neighborhood, we have mostly silver maples and box elder maples. So I really feel like box elder is one of those kind of like overlooked and underused plants because people see it as a weed tree. My neighbor you can't see it in this picture, but on the other side of that trunk, he cut off the other stem that tree had. And when he was doing it, I was kind of talking to him about, stuff and what was going on. And he was like, yeah, I hate these trees. I hate these weed trees. They're crappy trees. They like, oh, you hate it too. Like they grow all weird and then they fall apart. And it's like, well, if you think about why is the box elder there? It's a plant that was designed by time to live in a very wet place, right? With a lot of disturbance, like kind of like basically like the edge of a stream or edge of a river, right? So that's why it falls apart, because it's not intended to like live for like 200 years. It's intended to like basically grow really fast, hold the soil together, and then like make a bunch of babies, right? And then the reason why it's so persistent in our landscapes is because deer don't eat it. So that's why it's everywhere. Everywhere you see buckthorn, you're going to see a box elder maple. But the cool thing about box elders is you can drill a hole in them in March and you can get sweet, sweet water out of it. And then you can boil it down and make maple syrup. So I think it's one thing. It's like, we may be like, we may hate on the box elder, but it can give us gifts, right? It's a part of the living world. It's doing something and we need to respect it for that. So in the herbaceous layer, so this is a plant that I like to eat a lot, and this is called cutleaf coneflower, and it is delicious in the spring to get the greens, those like fresh greens, and like throw them in a salad. You can also cook them with fat. So I'm from North Carolina, and down south we have this thing called collard greens or turnip greens or mustard greens, and these are generally some kind of green from a brassica that's sautéed or cooked for a very long time, like stewed with fat back, which is pig fat. I don't eat meat anymore, but I used to love that as a kid. And my wife's developed a recipe now that it's like she's gotten pretty close to like the authentic taste with just different spices and stuff like that. So you can do that, yeah. And then one of my favorite things about this plant is that finches go crazy for the seeds, and they just like when they're in seed, like at the end of August, like they're just like going off, like eating them. The downside about this plant is that like it will not persist in the landscape for a long time if it doesn't have adequate moisture. So if it's in a drier spot, we talked about upland, lowland. If it's upland, it's not gonna be in the landscape for a long time. This may be a downside for some people. It grows like 8 feet tall. I like that aspect about it because I like these like charismatic kind of in your face plants. But remember, I didn't put this on the slide, but almost positive you can eat the root too. So if it gets too big, you don't like it in your landscape, you just dig it up and eat it. Here's another one that you can dig up and eat. So this is sweet cecily. And the entire plant, as far as I know, is edible. So you can eat the flowers, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the shoots, you can eat the roots. And it kind of tastes like anise. So that flavor is not for everyone. I respect that and understand that. Not everyone wants to chow down on licorice, right? But if you have a sore throat like I do right now because of seasonal allergies, I would love to drink some sweet cecily tea. And another cool thing about this plant is that it tolerates black walnut, which is edgelands. So black walnut is an allelopathic plant, meaning it gives off chemicals that stunts the growth of other plants. And since black walnut is native, there's a lot of native plants that can still grow under black walnut, and sweet cecily is one. So that list of plants that I showed you before, this is a list of things that you can do with those plants. I'm not going to go into extreme detail, but like, again, if you want to get a copy of the slide or the presentation, just send an email and you can take a look at it. So that was the canopy layer, the herbaceous layer, and then this is the ground layer. So we'll start seeing this plant soon. That's Spring Beauty or Claytonia. Yeah. And basically that whole thing is edible. If you can get this, to grow in grass too. And then you could dig it up and that would be great. Okay, let's talk about edgeland plant examples. So here we have the canopy layer. So those again are the trees. So we've got hackberry. They're all berries in this in this archetype, right? Hackberry, shagbark hickory, black walnut, butternut, black cherry, choke cherry, serviceberry, spruce, and then the shrub layer is really dominated by berries. So we've got elderberry, raspberry, blackberry, gooseberry, nannyberry, high bush cranberry. I was trying to get all the berries right in a row. Black currant, black chokeberry. I think I already said that. Hazelnut. And then there's grapes, groundnut, which is a vine, and then cut plant. You can actually eat cut plant. You can eat the stems of that. Now in the ground layer, we have blueberry, because blueberries, we call it a shrub, but it only gets like 2 feet tall, maybe. Sweet fern is a similar thing. It only gets like a foot or two tall. Strawberry, violets, harebell, and then yellow pimpernel. Okay, so the plant that I want to focus on for the canopy layer is hackberry. We had a lot to choose from, but I went with hackberry for 2 reasons. Number one, there's several of them growing in my neighbor's yard, and number 2, I find the fruit very delicious. I just eat it raw. When it falls on the ground, I'll just pick it up and eat it. But the only thing you have to be careful of is it has like a really hard seed on the inside. So what you can do with that is basically like grind it up and make kind of like a porridge. And then you can also make something that's called hackberry milk. But it's basically like you grind it all up, and then you boil it down, and you can make a number of different things with that. Like a fruit leather, or you can mix it into a porridge like oatmeal or something like that. You could bake it into stuff But I think this is a really, again, another like overlooked plant that's like excellent in the landscape because it's super resilient. It's very strong. It doesn't blow down in windstorms. It's got really strong wood. It's drought tolerant, and it has pretty good color in the fall. Yellow. Yellow is a color too, right? In fall. But the more important thing is that it can feed you and it can feed that living world, right? So it's very strong with ecological services because tons of different animals, birds, insects eat this this plant. So you can see the pitting here that's going on here. That's like this like little gall that lives in the leaves. So like they all look like this, but it's kind of like it's an attribute of the plant in a way. In the same way that they sell, what's that, Clolius? You see it at all the garden centers with all the funky, crazy, like some people will look at that and be like, man, that plant looks diseased, you know? But some people look at it and they're like, oh, it looks beautiful. So you could kind of shift your thinking to think the same way about the hackberry, right? Like, oh, those leaves they look crazy. They're all spotted and got like galls living in them. What? That's an insect factory, you know? And then I love the bark. I think the bark is very like charismatic, right? In the shrub layer, I wanted to focus on gooseberries. So gooseberry is it's a dangerous plant. It has gigantic thorns, so be careful when working with this plant. But it makes very, very delicious berries. So it's hard to get them into the house because my son just goes and eats them all, or I do, like as I'm working in the yard. But when you get them into the yard, when you get them into the house, you can make all kinds of things with it, like pies and jams, or basically anything that you could, use, like anything you could bake, like a blueberry kind of. And then the unripe fruit can actually be made into kind of like a lemonade kind of smoothie deal. So if you ate that green fruit right now, your mouth would be like, you'd make all kinds of funny faces. But if you wait a week or two, you'll get delicious fruit. So this is a picture that I took 2 days ago. So these are fruits from last year that we pulled off the plant. We actually got them inside the house. We froze them. And then I made oatmeal with them, and it was delicious. So there's also raspberries and strawberries from the garden too. And I think, this is the wild type raspberry. So that's not a cultivar or like a design species. It's just the wild type one. But you can see the gooseberries are all different sizes too. There's like little tiny ones and there's some big ones. And then there are cultivated varieties of the plant that are like yellow and they have different colors, all the colors in the rainbow. But I like to go with just the straight species. So what's cool about this plant is it can the time that it blooms is usually like June. So it's like kind of on the cusp of like spring and early summer. So it fills a nice niche for like wandering like bumblebee queens, and like before they've really set up the nest and gotten going in terms of making their brood there. Because I don't know if you noticed this, but like in Minnesota, we have like that kind of like the spring ephemeral season, and then there's a little bit of a lag there where it's like the only thing that's blooming is maybe golden Alexanders and maybe penstemon, and this is kind of like in that little niche too. So it's a good plant to have around because it blooms later than those spring ephemerals and those early blooming trees, but it's not blooming in the middle of the summer when a bunch of other stuff is blooming. Okay, and then on the ground, we've got this yellow pimpernel. This plant is new to me. I just planted it in my garden like 2 years ago, so it hasn't really quite taken off yet. And so I have to readily admit that I have not actually eaten this plant. But based on research, I found that the roots are edible and you can make a tea with them, and that you can also eat the leaves and the shoots, and that they have kind of like a lovage flavor, which if you're familiar with culinary herbs, lovage is like really, it's kind of like a super strong celery flavor. So you can make ranch dressing with it or just chop it up and throw it in a salad. And then I think this is one that is like, they're always in, I mean, chances are probably none of you have this in your yard, right? So this might be a good one to have in your edgeland habitat, right? Yeah. It's also a host. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to say it's a host plant for swallowtails because it's in the carrot family too. So it's kind of like it can take more shade, as I understand. It can take more shade than golden Alexanders. So you could have golden Alexanders in the sun, and then this one kind of in the shade, right? So here's our more kind of honed in information about the canopy layer in the different trees and what you can do with them. One thing I wanted to point out was the shagbark hickory is technically only native to like one county in southeast Minnesota, but you can use the bark as like a seasoning if you like process it, and it has kind of this like kind of smoky flavor, right? And then you can burn the wood to smoke meats and stuff too. Any others? Oh, and I did want to point out that the black cherry, the seeds are poisonous. So a lot of the cherries are like that. They have a small amount of arsenic in the seeds. So don't eat the seeds. I think you can get away with eating a few of the choke cherry because they're not as strong with the arsenic. But the black cherry, definitely don't eat those seeds. Like you want to process using like a food mill, or somehow maybe you could like let the flesh kind of soak and then peel it off, you know. And then here's the shrub layer. So if you go back to the beginning of the presentation, remember I said the edgeland habitat is the most diverse, and that's going to be where most of our options are in terms of like stuff that we want to eat readily. Again, that's also why deer like hang out in the edgeland, because that's where all the delicious stuff is to eat, right? So highlights here. Another thing that I want to point out is elderberry is, two things I want to point out about that plant. There's another one that's called Sambucus rubra, I think. So that's the red elderberry, and that's probably going to be more prevalent in Minnesota. Don't eat that one, because that one, it historically, like in an ethnobotanical way, has historically been processed, and you can eat it, but people don't really eat that because it can make you sick. And then the same thing with Sambucus canadensis, the seeds are poisonous again. So don't eat the seeds, just eat the processed berry. So my wife makes kind of like a cough syrup with it. That's really, really, really good. And then the other thing that the other plant I want to kind of like point out is the high bush cranberry. There's a couple of things about this plant. There's a European counterpart to this plant. I forgot to include the botanical name, but you can eat the berries of both, but the European one tastes disgusting. Like it is immediate, like you put it in your mouth, you're like, oh my God, that's not good at all. The high bush cranberry, the native version, is delicious and tastes like cranberry. And I find it palatable enough to just take off the plant and eat it. Me and my son were doing that last year. They didn't make it into the house because we just ate them all in the yard. And the other kind of like thing I wanted to point out about this is more of an East Coast phenomenon, but basically the European high bush cranberry, I can't think of the name right now. It hybridizes with our native one. So it's creating all these hybrids that, again, the berries are disgusting, which is unfortunate. so you have to be careful about the genetics of this plant and where you get it from. So this is one case where I would like maybe advocate for getting a plant that is grown from cuttings instead of grown from seed, because the seeds could be the hybrid, right? Yeah. And then on the ground layer, well, of course, everyone knows blueberries, and then sweet fern makes a great tea. Violets, I will sing praises of every day, all day long, because you can eat the leaves and the flowers. And in doing this research, again, I have not eaten harebell, but you can eat the flowers. And that surprised me because that's something about that plant. I was like, it just looks poisonous to me. I don't know. But turns out you can eat it.
Preston,
What?
sorry to interrupt, but we actually have to be out of here by 8:30.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to see if you.
Yeah. I'll kick it in a high gear here. So our third archetype is the grassland. So this is going to be a little bit different because there's not really a lot of trees that grow there other than plum or the domestic apple that we were talking about before. But it's primarily going to be in the structural layer is going to be cherries and dogwoods and roses, and then sumacs. There's a bunch of different prairie plants like that you can eat, so you should look at those. And then in terms of the matrix layer, which is basically the ground layer. So let's just focus on our highlighted plants. So for the structural layer here, I've got aromatic sumac. So this is one you can make a tea, or excuse me, like a lemonade with the berries, or you can dry the berries and then rub them and turn them into a spice blend that's used a lot in Mediterranean food. This is again another. This is not the low grow one. This is the tall grow one. But you have to be careful if you're allergic to like cashews or some tree nuts. You have to be careful with this one because it's in that cashew family. So this is one that evening primrose. You'll see this growing everywhere on the side of the road or whatnot. I don't advise eating the ones on the side of the road, but you should and can grow this in your own yard because it's a biennial. So that means it'll only be around for 2 years. And if you hate it, just don't let the seeds fall on the ground. But you can eat the seeds. So that's good because you can literally eat like this entire plant. You can eat the flowers, you can eat the root, you can collect the seeds and make like a porridge with it or like a hot cereal. This is one that if you have sun, you probably already have this growing in your yard, and you can make a delicious tea with it. So this is prairie clover. And then this is a cool plant because it supports specialist bees, which they definitely need help. So help them out. Here's more information about the structural layer and all the different things that you can do with these plants. Here's the seasonal layer. One thing that I wanted to point out was the rattlesnake master, because that's a very popular plant in landscaping. So I just think it's funny that you can eat that plant. You just have to tear off some of the leaves and just eat the inside of the stalk at the beginning of the season. And then one that surprised me about this one was prairie smoke. I didn't know you could eat that until I did research for this presentation. So I plan to chow down on that in a couple weeks when it starts really popping up. And then one that I actually love a lot is the purple poppy mallow. Not technically native to Minnesota, but it's got a really delicious carrot-like root that you can eat. So again, if you want this presentation, I can mail it to you. But so these are some native weeds that have been eaten by indigenous people for millennia. So these are probably already in your yard, so you should just eat them because they're there. Don't pour chemicals on them, just eat them. And then here's some plants that you can eat that I am saying you should not eat because they're very rare in some spaces. These plants I think are doing more by existing in intact ecosystems than they are inside of your tummy. So yeah, you can eat these, but I don't recommend eating them unless you are cultivating them and planting them in your own yard. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, you know, these are a bunch of different invasive weeds that you can eat. So before you eat any native plant, you should think about eating these first, just to get rid of them. Be your own goat, right? Yeah. And then here's a list of people who I really trust on the internet that have a lot of really good things to say about foraging and eating native plants. So Alan Ergo, Alexis Nelson, and then Tim Clemens is a local guy. He teaches classes on foraging. They're probably already booked up for the spring, but you should look at his company and you should follow what he's doing. Here's the list of books that I brought today over here. So these books are about foraging and native plants and eating them. These books are about ethnobotany and native plant culture more broadly. And then these books are about landscaping with natives. So the last thing I want to say, which is kind of redundant at this point, is I'm going to be at the Wild Ones native plant sale in May, early June, or late May, early June. So please come see me. If you got any questions about how to order online, you can send me an email and I can help you out with that. But basically, like, if you buy from me and you select your pickup location as Big River, Big Woods, Big River, Big Woods will get 3% of that sale, right? So you're funding the community service by buying from me, like, because then I allocate that certain portion and I'll write a check to the chapter. Okay.